Good morning, friends, and it's my pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the Employers Federation for organizing this. And I do appreciate the opportunity to provide an overview of the economic landscape, and it's always a pleasure for me to see all of you in one room. As I've been saying since last 2 years that we've been in government, and this has also been a commitment by the Honorable Prime Minister, and we remain very strong in our belief that we must be always open to dialogue and collaboration with all stakeholders, including the private sector. So over the past 2 years, we have, as you would have noticed, prioritized meaningful and genuine consultations. Starting with the National Economic Summit, then we've had extensive nationwide consultation on the National Development Plan, probably one of the most consulted National Development Plan that we have put out with the support and the help of every stakeholder in the country. The National Development Plan focuses on getting the basics right in the immediate to medium term, focused on fixing our ailing public health, there's no secret about it, tackling our water problems by replacing the old age infrastructure, fixing our drainage, roads, and other public infrastructure. Unfortunately, this will take time, given the ground reality, and it will cost us billions of dollars, not millions. So today I wanted to start by sharing my views and thoughts on some of the topical issues before I get onto the economy. And I want to take the opportunity. The Honorable Prime Minister is arriving tomorrow morning, so my acting will stop tomorrow morning. But I do want to make some comments about some of the topical issues, including the review of the 2013 Constitution. So let me start first with the 2013 Constitution. Cabinet approved the review of the 2013 Constitution, and since its imposition, the 2013 Constitution has been subject to widespread criticism, and many of you would remember for 8 years in opposition, we constantly reminded the people about the flaws of the 2013 Constitution. And we have to understand that the 2013 Constitution evolved through an illegal process which was unilaterally imposed on the people of Fiji. In fact, I remember very well, and it's well documented, the military government had its own decree, Decree 57 and 58 of 2012, which actually laid down the process that would be followed in formulating the new Constitution. Unfortunately, they did not even follow their own laws in formulation of the Constitution, including the convening of a Constituent Assembly, where the final Constitution would have been approved by the people. So that process itself was flawed, and I'm pretty sure that the Employers Federation would have had no input in that Constitution as well. And I don't think you were consulted in an open forum like this. So we need to understand that the Constitution has implications on everybody and almost every aspect of national governance and public policy. So all stakeholders, in our view, should have an opportunity within the process, within the law, to be able to express their views and formulate or help government formulate a view on what a new constitution or an amended constitution or a reviewed constitution should be. For the last 2 years, we have, and I know apart from the Constitution, the Employment Relations Act has been a very topical and sometimes controversial subject in the last few months. We have allowed intense discussion on almost every issue, including the Employment Relations Act, which I'm going to come back later. So on the Constitution, people have been asking us what are the changes that the government intends to bring about. I can tell you that as a government, we don't want to dictate or impose what we want in the Constitution. This is an opportunity. The bill for amendment to the Constitution would go into Parliament in the March sitting. The Constitution Review Commission will be formed, and all that process will allow the public and every stakeholder to have a say. For example, we want to have a robust discussion on a number of other legislations emanating from the Constitution. And there are many provisions in the Constitution, such as the formation of the Accountability and Transparency Commission, the Code of Conduct Bill, which has been languishing for the last 8 years or 10 years. We are now bringing all that back, including the Freedom of Information Act. So even the provisions in the current Constitution, the institutions in the current Constitution were not formulated which would hold leaders to account and those in public offices to account. So we need to bring all that back. The only institutions that were formed, which were intended to weaponize and deal with the opposition. So those are aspects of the Constitution and aspects within the Constitution that will need to be discussed. So all I want to assure you on behalf of the Honorable Prime Minister and the government that the review of the Constitution is being done to make the Constitution better, and we will need your support, we will need your participation, not only in the review of the Constitution, but also with the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which will reset the platform for lasting social, economic, and political advancement of our nation. And I've said this a number of times since we've come into government, that this is the first time in Fiji's 54-year independence history that a government that has changed from one lot to another has actually lasted for more than a year. We've lasted for more than 2 years now. And this is a good signal, good step for our country in making sure that we have democracy, institutions of governance intact at all times. I wrote an article back in 2012 and I compared and I said why Fiji is not the Mauritius of the Pacific. And one of the things that comes out very clearly is how we've destroyed our democratic institutions over the last 30 years and how we've not been able to transition changes in government in a peaceful and an orderly fashion. And I am actually feeling very confident that our government has set in a process, a culture, an approach that will set a foundation for the future of this country in terms of constitutional and democratic governance. Let me now move on the Employment Relations Act and Work Care Bill. Friends, the tripartite arrangement that was in existence in this country was destroyed. And for 16 years before we came in, there was nothing like that. The union movement and workers' rights were suppressed for many years. And as a government, we firmly believe that through open dialogue between employers, employees, and government, we can ensure a win-win situation for all. And that's why we have restored the tripartite arrangement, and the ERA and the Work Care Bill is being discussed in that spirit of open and frank dialogue. We feel that some of us, I get a sense that we've unnecessarily become too alarmist, and I agree that perhaps some of the things in the draft bill should not have gone out into public consultation without looking at it more carefully. And of course, it created a lot of noise. I know a lot of businesses, employers talk to me. We've had a meeting. But this is what democracy is about. The more noise you have, the more it's indicative of a democracy that works. So as a government, as ministers, we, and I've said this very clearly on a number of occasions, including to the media, that we are not afraid of the noise. We are not just thinking about the next election. I think in a democracy, that's very healthy, and it is necessary. So we've heard very clearly from the employers, from private discussions, about the concerns with respect to the Employment Relations Act. We've extended the timelines for submissions, and I hope that all of you have or are going to use that time to provide that feedback. Some of the key issues on additional leave entitlements, quantum of fines, criminalization of the ERA, definition of managerial threshold and overtime eligibility, drafting of the law itself, including certain provisions around harassment, etc., have all been heard loud and clear. And government is looking into it, and I can assure you that the final law that will be enacted will be a law that all of us, including government, because government is also a big employer, so we are also necessarily concerned about certain provisions. And we feel the kind of vibes that we get from the private sector as well. And there are a lot of merit in what some of you have said, quite openly, publicly, and that's good. And so we've heard you, and as I said, we will ensure that we end up with a law that is in the interest of everyone and in the interest of the country. The other issue that I want to touch on very briefly, and I know the media has asked me this a number of times. Some call it a trade war, but very briefly, the tariff policy of the US government and the trade tensions that we are seeing globally, it is, in my view, too early. In fact, whenever you have a trade war or a tariff war, there are always things that happen. There would be unintended consequences of some of these policies. Trade diversion does take place. So the recent tariff announcements, 25% on Mexican and Canadian goods, I think still under pause. And other plans with respect to 10% tariff on China, 25% on Australian steel and aluminium. I don't know if that's going ahead. All these even suggestions about trade protection, tariffs, always ignite reactions from businesses, from countries. And in economics, we always say that the expectation of what happens in the future determines what people and businesses do today. And that is why it is very important as part of economic policy making not to create expectations that are invariably negative, that invariably are going to cause, lack of confidence in what businesses and countries want to do. So my really personal view beyond trade policy is that potential tariffs, potential shifts in US fiscal policy, government expenditure, etc., cut in foreign aid, climate commitments, development assistance, immigration, and regulatory frameworks, geopolitical and security treaties could reshape global economic conditions. And if major economies retaliate against US tariffs, we could see intensified trade tensions. Could disrupt supply chains, capital outflow volatility which may affect indirectly our economy. It all depends on the transmission mechanism, through trade, through remittances, through labor mobility. There are different mechanisms or transmission mechanisms through which these effects can have impact on us. Some people are saying to me that, if the tariffs are put on Canada and China and Australia, especially on China, Canada, where we import from, we could see cheaper stuffs coming through the Pacific and Fiji, because there will be excess capacity in countries like China. Obviously, they would want to sell the exports to US would become expensive for those countries, so they obviously would look at opportunities elsewhere. And so we could benefit in some sense, but as I said, it is too early. Some of it has not been put yet. The US is saying, okay, they're giving a month, I think, for Canada and Mexico. There's some discussion there. So let's not panic. Let's not be alarmist about how this is going to affect Fiji. I don't think that there is any immediate threat with respect to how the transmission mechanisms are going to work and how Fiji's economy is going to be impacted. So it's basically too early, but I also think that it's not going to have any significant or drastic impact. Let me now move on to Fiji's economic performance. Let me just say that our domestic economy has performed extremely well since we took office in 2023. Fiji's macroeconomic fundamentals have strengthened over the last 2 years. Our post-pandemic economic recovery has been very impressive, primarily driven by a strong rebound in the tourism sector, which has positively also impacted other sectors of the economy. Last year, visitor arrivals hit a new record of 982,938, a 5.7% increase from 2023 and 88,000 more than pre-pandemic levels in 2019. Key tourism indicators, earnings, hotel occupancy, length of stay have all improved, demonstrating strong industry performance. And beyond tourism, we have seen notable expansion in key industries including gold production, electricity generation, cement manufacturing, timber processing, beverage production, etc. Our financial system remains sound, underpinned by strong balance sheets of commercial banks and other financial institutions. The banking sector has reported rising profitability, declining non-performing loans, and an 11.4% increase in credit growth as of December 2024. Interest rate remains historically low at 4.5%, and liquidity levels stood at 2.2 billion as of January 2025. And all this is good for investments. There have been a lot of suggestions by World Bank, IMF for us to raise interest, given what happened in Australia and New Zealand. So we are actually saying that we did the right thing. Australia and New Zealand are now looking at reducing interest rates. I don't know what happened in Australia yesterday. The Reserve Bank was, I think they have also reduced it. So domestic demand also remains very strong, supported by a recovering labor market, higher remittance inflows, and increased household incomes. Inward remittances rose by 6% in 2024 to a record of 1.3 billion and are expected to remain stable in the medium term. There could be some impact depending on how our partner economies do. Investment activity, I'm pleased to say, is also gaining traction, with new lending for investment rising by 24.1% in 2024. Construction activity, particularly in the tourism and infrastructure sectors, continued to accelerate. Cement sales increased by 11%, reflecting heightened development momentum there as well. On the external front, Fiji's trade deficit is projected to narrow to 34% of GDP in 2024, still very high from 36.5% in 2023. The current account balance is set to improve to 4.7% of GDP, largely due to tourism and remittances, I must say. Foreign reserves stood at 3.7 billion at the end of 2025, sufficient to cover 5.9 months of retained imports. The Reserve Bank of Fiji continues to support growth through an accommodative monetary policy, keeping the overnight policy rate at 0.25%. This will ensure liquidity remains ample for economic expansion. Friends, the economic momentum is clearly reflected in the tax collections. So it's not just the tax reform that we did in 2023-2024 budget. It's the heightened economic activity that is clearly reflected in the strong tax collections, as we have exceeded our projections in the first 6 months of financial year 2024-2025. And from August 2024 to January 2025, we've collected about 1.8 billion in taxes, which is 136.4 million higher than the forecast of the period, and accounts for around 55% of the total budgeted tax revenues for the fiscal year. So in light of these developments, I am very confident that the growth projection of 3.4% for this year will be on track, and in fact, I think it will surpass those expectations of 3.4%. So this broad-based growth will be driven by the tourism sector and supported by other related industries such as transport, accommodation, wholesale, retail, and public administration, finance, and insurance sectors. So I wanted to put that out as a brief overview of the economy, because I think it's important to also understand that what we did in 2023-2024 budget with respect to consolidating our finances, relooking at our strategies, has worked. In the last budget, we focused on income growth. I know there were mixed reactions with respect to increase in the salaries of the civil service, increase in the minimum wage, but that is also part of strengthening economic activity in the economy, which invariably also helps businesses, which creates that confidence right across the board. So let me just give you another quick snapshot of the fiscal policy and the debt management, because this is another topic that's discussed quite often, and sometimes in a slightly different way. We've managed to reduce the debt to GDP ratio from 90.7% in 2021-2022 financial year to 79.4% in 2023-2024 financial year. The ratio is projected to fall further to 77.8% by July 2025. And this has been largely possible due to the rapid recovery in GDP, as well as the government's strong commitment to reducing fiscal deficits from as high as 7% down to between 4 and 4.5% as part of our fiscal consolidation strategy. And as I said, while tax reforms have played an important role, we are also improving public sector efficiency and prioritizing high impact projects and making sure that the additional revenue that we are collecting, that the finances that we are able to source in concessional loans and grants is all going to be part of our strategy, budget strategy, to bring down Fiji's debt to ratio down to 60%. And this will take at least years, between 10 to 15 years. So it is not something that is easy. You know, if you look at what the people expect, what the people were used to over the years, and our debt trajectory, because ultimately, if we don't rein in on our debt trajectory and our path towards fiscal consolidation and bringing the overall debt to GDP ratio down to at least 60% in the next 10 to 15 years, we will have a lot of pain in this country, including the pain on our business community. In countries such as New Zealand, you know, even when it reaches 30%, they start worrying about the debt to GDP ratio. So we recognize that balancing fiscal prudence with economic growth is always challenging, but it is essential for long-term sustainability. And the government, therefore, remains committed to fostering a resilient, inclusive economy while ensuring that fiscal safeguards are in place. Addressing the cost of living. This is another very important subject. Globally, it's being talked about. The communication that people have with respect to some of these issues is very important. And rising cost of living will always remain a concern for everyone, not only here, but globally. Global commodity price volatility, geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruptions have significantly impacted essential goods and services. So to mitigate this, we expanded VAT exemptions on 22 essential items. We've increased social welfare assistance, increased minimum wage, increased wages in the public sector, subsidized transportation cost, introduced back-to-school support, and we've forgiven over $650 million in student debt, lifting the burden on 53,000 families, essentially adding that income into the pockets of those families and those who have just started work after completing their qualifications. We've also invested in agriculture, MSMEs, and cooperative business to enhance domestic production and increase economic self-sufficiency. I wanted to say that the private sector has a role to play in addressing cost of living pressures. And businesses must ensure fair pricing, improve operational efficiencies, and adopt a long-term sustainable approach to profitability. I must also say that we cannot continue to protect industries with high import duties, restriction on import sources, and yet allow them to control production and charge unreasonable prices. As a small island economy, our future will be about creating those efficiencies, becoming more competitive, and we cannot continue with business as usual as we've done in the last 40 years. Some sectors have been protected for many, many years, and we still continue to protect them. We are also restricting imports. For example, chicken imports. We provide 42% duty protection to all the 3 chicken producers. We restrict import of whole chicken from everywhere. And so the responsibility on the chicken producers is that they should produce enough to be able to cater for the market that is here in the country and at a reasonable price. The government cannot continue to keep that protection and the people are forced to pay significant prices. There are people who are telling me that even with 42% duty, if they're allowed to import chicken from few other sources, they could pay 42% duty and yet sell whole chicken at a price cheaper than what our local producers are charging our consumers. I just wanted to give this example. I'm not pointing out a particular industry, but this is a very good example of what we are saying. So we want more efficiency, we want more production, so that there is fairness in what we are providing. I also realize that we have to acknowledge that labor market conditions have tightened globally. Following pandemic, there's been a global labor market restructuring. The demand for labor in certain countries went up. We've lost a lot of skilled labor force to Australia and New Zealand. But we are also putting in a lot of effort in the last 2 budgets. We put additional funding to provide more technical training, to ensure that we are at least training enough people within the country. But we also realize that productivity of our labor is a key driver for long-term economic growth. And that is something which will influence national wealth and living standards. So moving forward, it is government's wish and it will be our effort to work with the various stakeholders to ensure that labor productivity is improved. One of the employers told me that he plans his everyday production on average, assuming that 40% of his people won't turn up for work for a number of days in a week. And that is an indication of a very, very significant lapse in labor productivity, in the discipline of our workforce. So we recognize that. And I think the labor movement, the union movement in this country will also have to recognize those issues with respect to productivity. In other areas, the government is committed to cutting red tape, streamlining regulations, fostering a business-friendly environment. We will conduct a holistic review of bureaucratic processes across the economy to drive greater efficiency and ease of doing business. And I want to thank Jenny and many others from the private sector. And what we find as a government is involving the private sector, bringing people like yourselves into committees, into groups that actually tell our bureaucrats, tell our ministers that these are the real issues out there. We are beginning to find that we can improve some of these things much better. And I want to thank all those people who are involved in our fiscal review committee, in our task force on immigration and other committees for joining the government in helping change some of those really difficult issues that the businesses face. But we also wanted to say that the businesses have a responsibility to support labor productivity, ensuring the well-being of the workers, training, partnering with our training institutions, bringing more people into the workforce as trainees. We are giving quite a bit of funding for apprenticeship schemes, so that there is a collective effort to ensuring that we build our workforce that is productive, that is well-trained. I've talked about investing in infrastructure development. The National Development Plan sets a number of priorities and provides a strategic framework for resource allocation in the short and medium term. But its implementation, again, is not the sole responsibility of the government, as I've emphasized, and we will continue to reiterate collaboration amongst the government, private sector, and all stakeholders is crucial to achieving our national development goals. There are a number of developments in the area of connectivity. The private sector has played a pivotal role in advancing Fiji's ICT sector. We acknowledge the contributions of Vodafone and Digicel in Fiji in upgrading network infrastructure to provide reliable digital connectivity. The introduction of Starlink, the arrival of Google's subsea cable, will further drive digital inclusion and will strengthen Fiji's global connectivity. We are also addressing the gaps in financial inclusion, gaps in access to financial products and services, and the number of policies and guidelines that are being developed to promote inclusive financial solutions to ensure that there is more inclusivity in that area as well. Private sector-led growth, as I've always said, that government's economic growth depends on what the private sector does. Your role, your vision, your meaningful collaboration with government is going to be extremely crucial if we want to raise our growth beyond 3 or 4% to, say, at least 5% or more in the future. And as I said earlier, if we want to bring our debt to GDP ratio anywhere near 45 to 50% in the next 10 years, we would need a growth rate of at least 5% annually to be able to do that. And we can only do that by moving away from business as usual, which means that the government has to move beyond just the business as usual. We are saying to our colleagues in government, we are saying to our permanent secretaries, we're saying to our civil servants that business as usual is not going to help us lift the economic potential in our country and achieving a growth rate of 5% or more. So all I want to say, friends, today is we are always open to dialogue. Ministry of Finance, in particular, is open to dialogue. We have already called for submissions for our budget for 2025-2026 financial year. And I'm sure that the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation will make a lot of submissions. We invite you to do so, and we look forward to working with you. And once again, thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to speak to you. I know I've taken a bit of time, but I look forward to your questions and comments later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Acting Prime Minister, for sharing the topical issues of the Constitution, the Employment Relations Act.